Chapter 1: The Stray and the Star. The first time I saw Charlie, I wasn't looking for him. It was a late evening in mid November. The kind of chill that crawls under your skin but doesn't quite settle there. I had just wrapped up my shift at the diner, the usual mix of greasy plates, clinking coffee cups, and the faint hum of the jukebox in the corner. Nothing out of the ordinary. But the moment I stepped out into the parking lot, there he was. He wasn't much to look at. A scruffy, dirty dog with patchy fur and sad, tired eyes that seemed to tell 1,000 untold stories. But there was something in those eyes, something that pulled at me like an invisible thread, one I couldn't escape even if I wanted to. I paused, keys still in hand, as I watched him slowly drag himself across the parking lot. His gait was slow, labored. Like he'd been running on empty for a while. It was cold, and the wind kicked up a few stray leaves around him, but he didn't seem to notice. He just moved, one step after another, as if he had a destination in mind. "Hey, you lost?" I asked, half to myself, more out of habit than expectation. There was no answer, of course. He didn't bark, didn't even acknowledge me at first. But when he finally looked up, his eyes met mine, and for that brief moment, it felt like the whole world stopped spinning. There was something so lonely in those eyes. Something I understood all too well. I stepped forward cautiously. "You hungry?" His ears perked up just a little, and he took a hesitant step toward me. But he didn't get any closer. He just stood there, staring, like he was waiting for me to make the first move. I sighed, shaking my head. "All right, come on then." I knelt down, digging through my bag for the sandwich I'd forgotten to eat at the diner. I tore off a piece of it and extended it toward him. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. He hesitated for a moment, sniffing the air like he wasn't sure whether to trust me or not. But then, with a tentative movement, he took the food from my hand. His tail didn't wag. There was no joyful, hungry frenzy. He just ate quietly, one bite after another, his eyes still locked on mine. As if he was waiting for something. I sat there on the cold pavement, watching him, wondering what had brought him here. He wasn't the type of dog you'd expect to see roaming the streets of this small town. I didn't know it then, but that moment, that simple act of feeding a stray, would change everything. Charlie had been on the streets for longer than anyone knew. It wasn't just his fur that showed the wear of time, it was the way he moved, the way his eyes had learned to watch the world from a distance. He wasn't just a dog who had been abandoned, he had learned to abandon himself. To put up walls, to stop trusting the world. I didn't understand that right away. I only knew he was there. And I didn't know that when he walked away from me that night, his absence would linger longer than his presence. The next day, he was there again. Same time, same place. A little skinnier, a little more tired, but he was there. I couldn't help but smile when I saw him, even if it was a fleeting, tired smile. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," I said, leaning against my car as he approached, this time a little less cautious, though still careful. I offered him a new sandwich, and he accepted it, eating with the same quiet intensity. This time, I sat on the ground next to him, my legs crossed in front of me. I didn't say anything, just watched him. "What's your story, huh?" I asked softly, though I knew better than to expect an answer. But Charlie's eyes met mine, and for the first time since I'd seen him, there was a flicker of something in those eyes. A flicker of hope, or maybe it was just a need to be understood. Either way, it was enough to make me want to know more. That day, I didn't just give him food. I gave him a name. "Charlie," I said, as if saying it out loud made him real in a way he hadn't been before. "You're Charlie." He didn't respond, but then again, he didn't need to. I knew who he was, even if I didn't fully understand why he was here. As the days turned into weeks, Charlie became a regular part of my routine. Every evening, after my shift at the diner, I'd find him waiting for me by the parking lot. Sometimes he'd be sitting in the same spot where I first saw him, other times, he'd be pacing around, as if he couldn't quite sit still. But he never missed our little meetings. And each time, I'd bring him a sandwich, and each time, he'd eat it without a word, his eyes never leaving me. At first, I told myself I was just helping a stray dog. Nothing more. I wasn't looking for a pet, and I definitely wasn't looking for the kind of responsibility that came with adopting a dog. But the more I saw Charlie, the more I felt like I was the one who needed him. He had a way of making the world seem smaller, quieter. His presence, even the silence that came with it, made everything else fade away. There was something in him that I could relate to. A quiet kind of loneliness. A sense of drifting, of being lost without knowing how to be found. And maybe that's why, one night, I decided to do something I hadn't planned on. I opened the door to my apartment and looked down at Charlie, standing in the cold, waiting. "You want to come inside?" I asked, though I knew he wouldn't answer. He looked up at me, his eyes calm, his expression unreadable. But after a long pause, he took a step forward. Then another. And before I knew it, he was inside. And just like that, Charlie wasn't a stray anymore. Chapter 2: Unspoken Bonds. Charlie slept on the couch, his small, tired body curled into a tight ball. I had never seen him this relaxed before. It was strange to think that just a few nights ago, he was a stray, wandering the streets with nothing but his instincts to guide him. Now, he was here, in my apartment, no longer alone. The quiet rhythm of his breathing filled the space. I found myself watching him more than I cared to admit, tracing the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. I had never been good with pets, but there was something different about Charlie. Something that made the silence between us feel comfortable instead of awkward. I got up slowly, careful not to disturb him, and went to the kitchen to prepare my own dinner. The hum of the refrigerator and the sizzling of a pan were the only sounds in the apartment. The loneliness that had once hung over me like a constant cloud seemed to dissipate, replaced by the warmth of having another living being in the space. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel quite so alone. The days passed, and Charlie's presence became more of a routine than I had anticipated. He followed me around the apartment, his movements careful, like he was still unsure whether he truly belonged here. But he never hesitated to sit by the window with me, watching the world go by as the sunlight filtered through the blinds. It wasn't long before I started to notice the little things that made Charlie. The way he tilted his head when he heard a car door slam outside. The way his ears perked up whenever a dog barked down the street. And the way, every night, he would curl up in the same spot on the couch, as if that's where he had always belonged. One evening, as I sat on the couch reading, I noticed him pacing back and forth. His tail wasn't wagging, and his body language was tense. He stopped in front of the door, looking at me with those same tired eyes that seemed to speak volumes. "You want to go out?" I asked, though I had no idea where out was for him anymore. Charlie didn't bark or jump around. He simply stood there, staring at me with a quiet urgency. I got up and opened the door. He didn't run, didn't race outside like most dogs would. Instead, he walked slowly, cautiously, as if he were stepping into a world he hadn't seen in a long time. I followed him, staying close, just in case. We walked down the street, past the familiar houses and the flickering streetlights. Charlie led the way, his steps slow but deliberate. I didn't know where we were going, but somehow, I felt like I should trust him. After a few minutes, we reached the park. It was dark now, the only sounds the soft rustling of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. Charlie paused in the middle of the park, his body still, his eyes scanning the empty space as if looking for something or someone. I stood a few feet away, waiting. I didn't want to rush him. He had his own pace, his own way of processing the world around him. And then, just as I was about to call his name, I saw it. A flash of movement, just beyond the trees. I held my breath. A figure emerged, half in the shadows, half in the light. It was another dog, not too different from Charlie, but with a glimmer of hope in its eyes that I hadn't seen in Charlie's before. It was a young dog, smaller than Charlie, with a golden coat that shimmered in the dim light. Charlie didn't move. He didn't bark, didn't run toward the other dog. He simply stood still, his body tense, his eyes locked on the newcomer. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, memories, and something deeper, something I couldn't quite place. I wanted to reach out, to call Charlie back, but I didn't. I knew this moment wasn't mine to interfere with. The other dog, a female, took a few cautious steps forward. Charlie remained motionless, watching her with a quiet intensity. And then, something shifted. His stance relaxed. His tail, which had been stiff and unmoving, slowly wagged, just once. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. The two dogs stood there, just looking at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. I wasn't sure what it meant, but I knew it was important. The female dog took a few more steps, closing the distance between them. And just as they were about to meet, Charlie turned back toward me. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something new in them. It wasn't just loneliness anymore. It was something else, something that felt like relief, or maybe even hope. "Charlie," I whispered, not knowing what to say. Charlie looked at me for a long moment, his gaze steady and calm. Then, without a word, he walked back toward me, leaving the other dog behind. The female dog stayed where she was, watching us as we turned and walked away. As we made our way back home, I couldn't help but wonder what that moment meant. Was it a sign that Charlie wasn't meant to be alone anymore? Or was it just a reminder that even the loneliest souls need time to heal? Charlie walked beside me, his steps steady now. He was no longer a stray. He wasn't the dog that wandered the streets in search of something. He had found something here, with me. And I had found something in him too. Maybe we weren't so different after all. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Charlie's soft breathing next to me. He had, at some point during the night, moved closer to the bed. I stretched and glanced over at him, but he didn't stir. He just lay there, calm and content, like he had finally found a place where he could rest. I smiled, brushing a hand through my hair, and grabbed my phone. As I scrolled through the news, one story caught my attention. It was a local report about an animal shelter in need of volunteers and donations. My finger hovered over the article for a moment, and then I made a decision. It wasn't just Charlie that needed saving. There were others out there, just like him. And maybe, just maybe, I could help. I turned to Charlie, who was now lazily stretching on the couch. "What do you think?" I asked him, though I knew he couldn't answer. "Maybe it's time to give back." Charlie gave me a lazy look, then flopped back down onto the couch, as if to say, "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." And just like that, I knew. It wasn't just about me and Charlie anymore. We were part of something bigger. Something that needed both of us. Chapter 3: The Road Ahead. The days following our walk in the park felt different. Charlie's presence in my life had already started to change me in ways I wasn't fully aware of at the time. There was a sense of purpose that I hadn't had before. I'd spent so much of my life going through the motions, trying to figure out what was missing, that I hadn't realized it was always right in front of me. Charlie. The thought that had started as a passing gesture, a way to fill the quiet, had now turned into something deeper. Something real. I couldn't help but smile as I sat down at the kitchen table the next morning, a cup of coffee warming my hands. Charlie lay on the floor nearby, his eyes barely open, his body stretched out lazily in the sunlight coming through the window. "All right, buddy," I said to him, more to myself than to him. Time to figure out the next step. Charlie raised his head lazily and gave me a half-hearted glance. It was clear that he wasn't particularly interested in my plans for the day. He was content just being. But I wasn't. I pulled out my phone and opened the article about the animal shelter again. It was small, unassuming, but it had caught my attention. They were looking for volunteers, donations, and support. It was a local organization, a place that took in strays, rehabilitated them, and worked to find them new homes. I read through the information several times, feeling an odd pull in my chest. It was strange. I didn't even know what I was looking for there yet, but something told me I needed to go. I glanced at Charlie, who was now staring at the door as if he knew something was about to change. "You want to come?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Charlie didn't respond, of course, but he stood up and walked over to me. I took that as a yes. When we arrived at the shelter, I wasn't sure what to expect. It was tucked away in a quiet part of town, a small building that looked more like a house than a place for animals. The yard was fenced in, and I could hear the distant sounds of barking and the shuffle of paws on the ground. I knocked on the door and waited. A few seconds later, the door opened, revealing a woman in her mid-30s with warm eyes and a tired smile. She was holding a clipboard and had the kind of presence that immediately put you at ease. "Can I help you?" she asked. I cleared my throat. "I saw your article about volunteering, and I thought I might be able to help. I have a dog at home, and I've been thinking a lot about doing something for the animals here." Her smile widened, and she stepped aside to let me in. "That's great. We can always use help. Come on in, let me show you around." Charlie, as usual, was quiet beside me. He walked in beside me, his eyes taking in every new sight and smell. He seemed more alert than usual, more curious. I wondered if it was because we were in a new place or if something about the shelter stirred something in him. The woman led me through the small facility, introducing me to the other dogs. They were a mix of all breeds and sizes, some playful, some quiet, others shy and reserved. Each one had a story, a past that was as varied and complicated as their personalities. "Most of these dogs come from rough situations," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Some were abandoned, some were found injured or malnourished. But here, we do everything we can to help them. We give them love, care, and hope. And eventually, they go to families who can give them a forever home." I looked down at Charlie, who had become unusually still. His eyes were focused on the dogs in the other pens. I couldn't help but wonder if he recognized some part of himself in them. The loneliness, the struggle, the need for a second chance. "How can I help?" I asked, eager to do something, anything, to contribute. The woman smiled again. "Well, we're always in need of extra hands to help with cleaning, feeding, and socializing the dogs. But if you're interested, we could use more volunteers to help with training and helping these dogs get adopted. It's all about building trust and making sure they're ready for their next chapter." I nodded, feeling a surge of purpose. "I can do that." She handed me a volunteer application form and a waiver. "Great. We can start you with some basic tasks, and you can come back as often as you like." Charlie, still calm and composed, watched me sign the papers. Then, after a few moments, he slowly walked over to one of the pens. He stopped in front of a dog that was sitting quietly by the gate. The dog was smaller, with a coat of gray fur and eyes that seemed too old for such a young face. It watched Charlie for a long time, and Charlie did the same, neither of them making a sound. There was something in the way they looked at each other, something that felt familiar. The woman noticed too. "That's Luna," she said. "She's been here for a while. She's a little shy but very sweet once she gets to know you." I smiled softly, watching as Charlie turned away and came back to me. His movements were slower than usual, as if he had left part of himself behind in that pen. The woman didn't say anything more about it, but I had a feeling she understood. She'd probably seen this kind of thing happen before. The next few weeks passed by in a blur of activity at the shelter. I spent every free moment I had there, working with the dogs, cleaning the pens, and even helping train some of them. Charlie came with me every time. He wasn't a therapy dog, but there was something about him that made the other dogs gravitate toward him. His calm demeanor, his quiet confidence, it was as though they sensed that he had been through something they understood. But it wasn't just the dogs that Charlie helped. It was me too. Every time I saw Charlie interact with the dogs, I saw something shift in him. It was as though, little by little, he was healing too. One day, as I was working with Luna, I noticed something different. Charlie had walked over to the pen, and for the first time, he didn't just sit by the fence. He leaned in, his eyes focused on Luna's. She, in turn, took a hesitant step toward him. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the weeks wore on, I started to understand what I had been missing all along. It wasn't just about finding a place for Charlie in my life. It was about finding a purpose, about being part of something bigger than myself. Charlie had given me that. And maybe, just maybe, I had given him a chance to be part of something again, too. Chapter 4: The Unspoken Connection. It was a crisp Saturday morning when things started to feel different, even though they hadn't changed much on the surface. The shelter had become a second home to me, and Charlie had become an anchor in a way I hadn't expected. He was no longer the broken, hesitant stray I'd found in the parking lot weeks ago. His fur had started to shine again, his coat fuller, his steps lighter. He seemed more at peace with himself, more sure of his place in the world. I had started volunteering with the training program at the shelter, helping the staff work with the dogs who needed socializing. But Charlie wasn't just part of that program. He had become a bridge. He didn't bark at the other dogs. He didn't play with them like I expected. Instead, he sat. He observed. And somehow, that made the other dogs trust him. It was like he had an innate understanding of their fear, their pain, their loneliness. Maybe because, at some point, he had shared it too. That morning, I sat on the grass outside the shelter, watching Charlie walk around the yard. He wasn't the same dog who had wandered aimlessly through the streets. He had a purpose now. His eyes were softer. Less haunted. He was happy. I could see it in the way he carried himself, in the way he moved through the world now, like he knew where he was going. But there was still something I couldn't shake. Every time I looked at Charlie, there was this unspoken question lingering between us. It wasn't about where he came from or why he had ended up on the streets. It wasn't about his past, it was about his future. I could feel that, in a way, he still didn't quite know if he could trust this life I was offering him. It was like there was a part of him still waiting for something to go wrong. "Hey, buddy," I said, calling Charlie over as he meandered toward me. His ears perked up at the sound of my voice, and he trotted over, tail wagging slowly but steadily. I scratched behind his ears, a simple gesture that had come to mean so much to both of us. "I've been thinking," I said, my voice soft but filled with conviction. "Maybe it's time you had a family. A real one. A forever home." Charlie tilted his head, his eyes meeting mine with a depth that sent a chill down my spine. He didn't bark or whine, didn't do anything to indicate his thoughts. He simply stared, as though considering my words carefully. I ran a hand through my hair, looking at him with a mixture of sadness and hope. "I know we've got something good here. But you deserve more than just me in this place. You deserve someone who'll give you everything you need. And I think you're ready for that, Charlie. You deserve to have a family of your own." Charlie sat down beside me, his body a little closer than usual. He was still silent, but his presence felt stronger, more grounded. "Do you want that?" I asked, feeling a little silly talking to him like this. "Do you want to be adopted, Charlie?" For a long moment, Charlie didn't move. Then, almost as if in response, he leaned his head against my leg. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was the kind of thing that told me he wasn't ready to let go of the life we had. Not yet. And in that moment, I knew the truth. It wasn't just about him finding a forever home. It was about us finding something that worked, something that made sense for both of us. We weren't just a dog and his owner. We were partners. And maybe, just maybe, that was all we needed. Over the next few weeks, I continued working at the shelter, but my focus had shifted. Charlie had become part of my daily life in a way I hadn't expected. Our bond was stronger than it had been when I first brought him in. There was a sense of trust between us that I couldn't explain. We didn't need words. We didn't need grand gestures. We had found something quiet, something unspoken. But as much as I wanted to believe that we could keep going like this, I knew the time would come when I would have to face the reality of what we had created. The shelter was full of dogs who needed homes. And as much as I loved Charlie, I knew he was capable of more. He deserved more than a quiet life with me. He deserved a home where he could run and play, where he could feel like he belonged for good. I spent more time with Luna, the dog Charlie had shown an unusual interest in. She was shy, timid even, but there was something about her that mirrored Charlie in the early days, something that said she was waiting for someone to believe in her. One afternoon, I watched Charlie approach Luna's pen again. He was quieter than usual, as if the weight of the decision was hanging between us. He sat down in front of her gate and simply watched her. Luna, who had been pacing the fence, stopped and looked at him. There was no barking, no rushing toward each other. They simply stared, their silent communication filling the space between them. I watched, captivated. For a moment, it felt like I was witnessing something profound, a connection that went beyond words, beyond the simple act of looking at one another. Luna took a few hesitant steps forward, and Charlie didn't move. He stayed still, watching her with a softness that felt almost protective. And when Luna finally closed the distance, she didn't back away. She didn't cower. She stood beside Charlie, her body language more relaxed than I'd ever seen it. I could feel it then. Something had shifted in both of them. It wasn't just about being rescued. It was about finding someone who understood, someone who didn't ask for more than they were willing to give. I turned to the woman at the shelter, who had been watching the exchange from across the yard. "Do you think?" I started, not knowing exactly how to finish the thought. She smiled softly. "I think they've both found what they needed." I nodded, my heart full. I didn't know where this would lead, but I knew it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something new. As the days turned into weeks, Charlie's relationship with Luna deepened. They became inseparable, spending every moment together, whether it was lounging in the yard or exploring the shelter grounds. Their bond was quiet but powerful, and I couldn't help but feel like it was the missing piece Charlie had been looking for. It wasn't about being adopted by someone else. It was about finding the connection he had been searching for all along. One day, as I sat with Charlie and Luna, I realized that I wasn't just a volunteer anymore. I was part of something bigger, a family, a group of people and animals who were all finding their way through this life together. And in the midst of it all, Charlie was home. Chapter 5: A New Beginning. The days turned warmer as spring began to settle over the town. The shelter, once a place of quiet desperation, had become a hub of new beginnings. Every dog that left for a new home was a small victory, a step forward for those who had once been lost in the world. And for Charlie, the progress had been nothing short of miraculous. He had found his place in this world, a place where he was no longer wandering, no longer uncertain. He had found it with Luna, and together, they had become a symbol of what was possible when trust, patience, and love were given the chance to grow. But even with all the changes, one thing remained the same: the bond between Charlie and me. It had never been about ownership or possession. It had been about partnership, about being there for each other when life was too much to handle on our own. As the shelter's adoption rate soared, Luna found a family, a loving couple who had been searching for a dog to complete their home. I was happy for her, but there was a part of me that felt a twinge of sadness. I had watched Luna grow from a fearful, skittish dog into someone who trusted again. But I knew that this was her moment. She deserved it. Charlie, on the other hand, stayed with me. And that was when I realized the truth: Charlie wasn't just a dog. He was my family. The morning after Luna was adopted, I sat outside on the shelter's back porch, Charlie by my side. His coat had grown fuller, his muscles stronger, his presence in my life irreplaceable. I had come to realize that it wasn't just the dogs that had changed since we first met. I had changed, too. I wasn't the same person who had found him in that parking lot weeks ago. I wasn't the same person who had walked into the shelter looking for something, unsure of what I was even seeking. I had learned that life was unpredictable, and sometimes, the most important things come when you least expect them. I had come to understand that Charlie wasn't just healing because he found a home. He was healing because I had learned to heal, too. "Hey, Charlie," I said softly, scratching behind his ears. "I think we're ready now." He looked up at me, those familiar, tired eyes meeting mine. For the first time, they weren't just filled with uncertainty. They were filled with peace. He leaned into my touch, the bond between us stronger than ever. As I stood up and stretched, the shelter's manager came over to me. She smiled, the lines of exhaustion on her face softened by a quiet pride. "You know," she said, her voice full of warmth, "I've been meaning to ask you. Would you ever consider adopting another dog?" I looked down at Charlie, then back at her. "Maybe one day," I said. "But for now, I think Charlie and I are exactly where we need to be." The manager nodded, a knowing smile crossing her face. "I think you're right. But just so you know, you'll always have a place here. Both of you." Charlie wagged his tail, and I could see that the last remnants of the uncertain, stray dog had disappeared. He wasn't the same dog I had found all those weeks ago. And neither was I. As we left the shelter that day, Charlie trotted by my side, his steps more confident than they had ever been. We had come a long way, and yet, I knew this was just the beginning. We walked down the quiet street, the sun filtering through the trees, casting long shadows across the pavement. The world was bigger now, full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the weight of uncertainty. I had Charlie. And that was enough. The end.